Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, French President Macron has signed numerous bilateral deals in his ongoing state visit to China. How can China and France help each other realize their own goals? High-level inter-Korean talks are taking place with the South Korea-hosted Olympics just a month away. Can these talks be more than just Olympic truths? We're going to discuss that after this. And let's still begin it with the relations between China and France. We begin right here in Beijing, where French President Emmanuel Macron continues his three-day state visit to China, following a welcoming ceremony hosted by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People. The two leaders held official talks and oversaw the signing of bilateral deals in aviation, culture, and environmental protection. Macron said he was hoping for more bilateral cooperation within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. After their meeting, the two leaders gave a joint press conference. Let's listen in.
Human society is facing many challenges. As world powers with a long historical and cultural heritage and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and France shoulder special responsibilities and historical missions. We'll carry on our friendship and start our new work. We'll safeguard and develop the China-France relationship.
We are at a critical point to establish a joint strategy to build mutual trust. You mentioned several very essential points, and I would like to contribute. You mentioned our agenda in Europe and in the world. In the world, we face several major issues such as climate change, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank President Xi for his efforts when the Paris Pact was threatened.
For more on French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to China, we are now joined in our Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, who is the director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, to our program. Also, both in Paris, we want to welcome Ms. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who is a political commentator and columnist at the Telegraph and Weekly Standard. Welcome back to our program, Ms. Moutet. And Joav Toker, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. Welcome as well. I want to start with you, Ms. Moutet. Remember, just a few days ago, we were discussing about the French president's possible visit to China, and now he is making it. I remember then there were quite some differences of opinions between you and then our Chinese panelists. So, what about now? What do you make of the so far result?
I think what you are seeing is what Macron does best, which is something that has been thought through in advance, and a great deal of attention to symbol and detail and finding common ground. It's very interesting that President Macron has quoted former Premier Deng Xiaoping, and he said, you know, it doesn't matter what color a cat is if it catches mice. And that is exactly the Macron policy. We've seen this with his policy with America. He believes in pragmatism and achieving everything that can be achieved, notwithstanding his disagreement on something else. And that's what he's showing now, I think.
Ah, interesting. Well, there are 50 shades of gray, as they say, at least. So from white to black, where are we? What color exactly is it, Professor Toker? Between China and France, your assessment?
Well, to place it on a scale of colors would be original. So somehow difficult, but I'll take the challenge, as the ambiance, as the overall atmosphere seems to be indeed symbolically and concretely very positive. I mean, that's what leaders are supposed to do during this kind of summit event. But for the time being, about more of the half of the way through over these 3-day state visit of President Macron, things seem to be on the how should I say, on the color scale, brighter side.
Okay.
Let's put it on 4/5 of the measure towards the brighter side of the horizon.
4/5 of the measure toward the brighter side. Okay. Well, it's a kind of math. We need to work it out. Mr. Cui is smiling here in Beijing. Is China's assessment similar to those of our friends from France right now?
Yeah, I think indeed, because now we are become, partners for any, cooperation. I believe that this visit by President Macron will give, a new page exactly for China-France relations. And of course, I hope that it will give a very, very positive influence.
But, ambiance,
yes,
in the French word, was the Professor Joav Toker just used. But I wondered, Mr. Cui, here's the real thing. Is it about the ambience, or is it about the content?
Yes, I think now we should have, comprehensive understanding about the complicated, relations between China and France.
Okay,
indeed.
let's talk about trade.
Yes.
There are already some deals that we mentioned earlier in our program, about environmental protection, aviation, and some of the other climate change as well. But, besides this, which is what we have already done before, besides these areas, what else has China and France achieved so far? Strategically, are these two countries closer or more on the same common ground?
Yeah, exactly. I think if we look at these relations between China and France, undoubtedly, trade economy is important because it's not the war for these bilateral relations.
Right.
Also now, even for this trade issue itself, I think now, yes, China could do something to help this kind of a trade balance, just like the proposal from French side that China should import more from France. But now the question, I think the issue for this trade problem is, indeed, it depends on how could President Macron to push forward the reform in France, and how could France promote its competitiveness of its products. Because as we know, China is a...
You asked a very good question,
yes,
Mr. Cui, because I think what Mr. Cui is saying, Ms. Moutet, is that strategically, what is France thinking about itself, economically speaking, trade-wise as well, and strategically, is there some bigger goal that France and China, besides, bits and pieces, let's say, buying from France, what else the two countries really can work together for a bigger vision? Ms. Moutet, do we read anything out of this talk?
I think yes, and I think that was the plan all along. Where we have problems is the imbalance in the large trade deficit between France and China, and sometimes a feeling that whereas France is relatively open to Chinese goods and Chinese technology, China makes it much more difficult for French businesses. And I think there have been some cautious progress achieved during this visit, and we will see this at the end, because President Macron came and he made the case for a quid pro quo, saying, on the one hand, as one of the leading countries of Europe, I am saying that Europe should be more careful, and he said this, Europe should be more careful in allowing strategic areas of its economy be bought by the Chinese. But on the other hand, we need to have something that will mean that China can come, and we can have something that would be proportional instead of being completely imbalanced. And I don't think that was entirely refused from the Chinese side. I think there's an understanding of this.
Okay, interesting point, Mr. Cui. I have to come back to you because it has a lot to do with the Chinese attitude and also reflection about that. What exactly is it? Is President Macron from France trying to make some bargaining chips with these kind of arguments toward China, getting more benefits for France? Or do you think there is political gains that he could have when he go back home with remarks like this?
Yeah, I can understand that now there is a very, very difficult situation for President Macron, and also even for some other European leaders, especially when they are living in a situation with the rise of populists. As we understand, now President Macron tried to keep a balance between, to look for more cooperation with China. On the other side, to try to call for a kind of a sense of competitiveness from Europe with China and with some other emerging economies. I hope that yes, if he could keep the balance between those two, sides. But indeed, once he lose the balance, I think that there will be some risk for President Macron and some other politicians in Europe to get a kind of a conflicting situation.
I see. Politics is all about balancing all the time. Professor Toker, you know better probably than I do about that. So how about the balancing President Macron did this time? I mean, you think about the situation France is facing. Of course, President Macron, young, energetic, wants to be the leader of the Europe. Particularly at the time when Germany is still struggling with the forming of the administration, and certainly the chancellor is not necessarily doing very well right now. But whether France could really shoulder that task and France will be able to solve its own problem is going to be one of the lenses that people are using to examine France to see whether it could continue to be the leader of Europe. Professor Toker.
Well, that's indeed a very interesting perspective, but one should be careful, I believe, in terms of some of the commentaries that we've been hearing in Europe in general, and in France in particular, as you may imagine, over the last few months regarding the role of France and the new energies which the young President Macron is injecting into French potential leadership roles in the world. One should distinguish between the short run or the short-medium run, in which indeed, as you mentioned, we have a particular situation. Germany is looking for a coalition government. It's going on like that for about 4 months now. It would probably take a little bit more, but there will be a government in Germany. On the short, medium run, we have Britain, of course, involved in the Brexit procedure. We don't know exactly how long it would last and what would be the medium run or long run fallout of that. So it's true that conjuncturally speaking, you see a president in Paris which has a solid coalition, which has a new agenda, which has energy, which has youth, which is not ideologically poached in his overall approach, which is extremely pragmatic, which has President Trump and President Putin and President Erdogan coming over to Élysée Palace. Chinese President soon will be coming this year, we were told today. So there is that impression that France could furnish some kind of new leadership, but behind that there are objective elements, which is the economic power of France, for example, which is about 1/2 of overall German economic might, about the strategic potential, say, over maritime and ocean space. If you compare the British, for example, navy and maritime traditions and extensions to the French one, you have to be a little bit more cautious.
There we go.
One distinguished difference is that France, contrary to Germany and contrary to Britain, France does have territories in the Asia-Pacific.
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing, Professor, and the other panelists as well. Time is precious. We all understand that, particularly at the time of dramatic change. Everybody, every country has the ambition of playing a bigger and better role of a changing world. That's well understood and well respected. The thing is whether you have got the qualities and the capabilities and eventually the ability to implement and work with the others. So here are some of the things that we can talk about. One of the things is what initiative you brought to the world and to your neighbors about a way forward. Do you have the strategies? Do you think this strategy is attractive enough to bring others on board as well? And thirdly, will this strategy be inclusive or exclusive? If it is the former, it's going to be very attractive. So, having said that though, China, France right now, do they have anything like this to work on? Mr. Cui, very briefly from you first.
Yeah, I think firstly, indeed, as two big countries, Both China and France now we share the more, especially I think on the global governance. For example, how about the climate change issue, or counter-terrorism, or some other. But also on the regional level, we hope that China-France cooperation could give a very, very positive influence on China-Europe cooperation. But frankly, on the bilateral trade and some economic issue, I think still we need some more sensorily cooperation from France.
Mr. Cui, I have to say you're so diplomatic. You sound so diplomatic. So let me just say it directly. Ms. Moutet, what about Belt and Road Initiative? Do you see France is making effort, or do you see China is making effort that the two sides could meet in between and try to bring something more than what has been achieved so far? Ms. Moutet.
Well, we have one very good example in terms of French diplomacy reaching out to China and finding common ground, and that has to do with the climate change talks and the Paris Accord. And this, again, is coming at a very specific time where there's a bad man in this. I mean, America decided, under Trump, decided to walk out of the Paris Accord. China is well treated by the Paris Accord. This is one of the reasons why America walked out. And China is very keen on keeping the Paris Accord, and the Paris Accord, as their name indicates, was signed in Paris.
But Ms. Moutet, let me just say frankly, the Paris Accord was achieved last year, okay? And there is no bad man or bad person anymore on some of the other issues, for example, about the Belt and Road Initiative, about connectivity. So will China and France still got the momentum and the incentive to work together? Ms. Moutet, go ahead.
What do you mean by connectivity? Because I suspect what you mean by connectivity is not what we mean in France by connectivity.
Oh, what exactly do you mean, if you can explain very briefly?
We talk of connectivity when we talk about high-tech and telecoms and communications and GAFA. And I'm not sure that you were talking about the same thing.
Okay, Ms. Cui, you have to respond to that. Were we talking about the same thing?
Yes, we are trying to look for some more common ground exactly now. But of course, it will take some more time, because even now for this Belt and Road Initiative, even now from President Macron and the French government, they do have a more and more positive attitude to this initiative. But I could say that they will take some more time for public opinion in France and also in other European countries to follow up this common sense between China and Europe.
All right, Professor Toker, let me come back with you about that balance question that I threw to you earlier. This is also about balance. On the one hand, you need to keep yourself politically correct back at home, and you also need to be energetic and proactive, but at the same time, you have to figure out ways to work with the other. How about that balance for President Macron this time? What about Belt and Road? What about this connectivity? Whatever your explanation is there some real thing to work on, Professor Toker?
Well, indeed, that's a very interesting tool, if you wish, way of looking at what is happening in China over these a few days of the state visit, and the larger issues which will be with us once the visit is going to be over. And the word, perhaps, in that sense, would not be connectivity, but perhaps correlation. In which way could there be a correlation or a parallelism, a positive parallelism, between what Beijing may have in mind and Paris may have in mind? And here comes two major questions. One of them is on the French side.
Okay.
Does France indeed have an Asian Pacific policy? It is not obvious. Macron is a modern political thinker and political leader, and he recognizes the mighty role of China, emerging China, mighty China. But does he have concrete elements to feed into the international equations when it comes to conjunctural, punctual conflicts, such as the situation in the South China Sea, such as the situation over the Korean Peninsula? And beyond that, and here comes the Chinese element in that correlation aspect I'm trying to expose, the West is asking questions. France and other powers in the West are asking really questions, for example, regarding this huge initiative of the Silk Road, of the Belt and Road.
Belt and Road Initiative.
What are the real intentions of Beijing in launching this gigantic operation?
You got a question over there.
Exchange.
You got a question over there. Let Mr. Cui to briefly respond to that. We have to wrap up this part of the discussion. But Mr. Cui, you have to respond to that before we do.
Yes, I think that to deal with some regional challenges, including this territory issue, some other, is important. But we need to find, firstly, the relevance between China and France on this issue. Before President Macron come to China, French government gave a very, very positive, attitude to China's role in this South China Sea versus Korea Peninsula issue. But I think that now French role in this region, I mean Asia Pacific, in a constructive way, will be very, very welcome by China.
Okay, you haven't answered the other question, which is Belt and Road Initiative. What exactly is China's big ego, quote unquote, according to Professor Toker, coming from China?
Yes, I think that now we need to understand what's the relations. I think for China, the Belt and Road Initiative showcases Chinese logic to say that we need to deal with this, conflicts or some security issue in the region, but we need to deal with the development issue firstly. Once we did a good job in development field, we can try to find more resources and instruments to deal with other, security challenges.
When these kind of issues of understanding could not be handled all at the same time with one state visit, certainly we would not be able to do it also with one conversation. But I really appreciate the three of you for coming over and speak your mind from the bottom of your hearts. Cui Hongjian, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, and Joav Toker. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.